The question came out of my grandson's mouth so softly that it landed like a plate shattering in a quiet kitchen. We were standing in the checkout line at the pharmacy, and he was holding a bag of sugar-free butterscotch candies I hadn't planned to buy. "Grandma," he said, looking at me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve, "why don't they ever come see you?" I felt my smile stay in place the way old wallpaper clings to a wall long after the glue has gone dry. The register beeped. The clerk tore a receipt that smelled like warm paper, and I nodded as if the answer were simple. But it wasn't simple. Not to a boy with clean hands and honest eyes. Not to anyone, really. My name is Margaret, and I'm 68 years old. People like to call me sweet, the way they call a cardigan cozy, as if my only purpose is to soften the edges of a room. They don't see the weight of what I've carried, or the way a person can learn to walk straight, even while being leaned on. Harold used to say our home had good bones. He said it while tapping the banister that his father installed, and while running a hand over the kitchen table he built with his own 2 hands in 1979. Harold died on a rainy Tuesday in October, 5 years ago, right after the maple leaves started turning and before the first frost. Congestive heart failure, the doctor said, as if giving it a tidy name made it less personal. I remember the hospital bill more clearly than I'd like to admit. The thick envelope with the itemized charges, the little codes beside each service, the total that made my stomach tighten. I paid it with shaking hands at the bank, sliding my signature across paper that felt too official for grief. After the funeral, when the casseroles stopped coming and the sympathy cards stopped arriving, the days became long and quiet. I learned the sounds of my own house again, the refrigerator's hum, the neighbor's sprinkler clicking at dawn, the old clock in the hallway that kept time like it was doing me a favor. I stretched Harold's pension, my Social Security, and what little savings we had, the way a woman stretches dough when she's feeding more mouths than she can afford. My daughter Susan started calling more often back then. At first, the calls felt like sunlight. "Mom, are you eating?" she'd ask. "Are you sleeping okay?" She'd tell me about her job at the dental office, her husband David's projects, the kids' soccer schedules. And then, almost like a sigh at the end of the conversation, she'd mention something else. "Mom, the car needs brakes. We're short this month. Mom, the daycare increased their rates. Mom, the credit card it's just a mess and we're trying." I told myself it was what families do. I told myself Harold would have wanted me to help. I'd drive to my bank still wearing my good coat like armor, and I'd take out cash or write a check. Sometimes I'd use the bill pay counter and ask for a money order because Susan said it looked cleaner for the landlord. I kept the stubs in a shoebox under my bed, along with receipts for groceries and the heating oil delivery, because I've always been the kind of woman who believes paper can tell the truth when people won't. By the time Tommy, my grandson with the soft question, was old enough to notice patterns, the visiting had become rare. Birthdays came with a quick video call. Christmas came with a rushed drop-off of a gift bag at my porch, always when they were already in the area. Susan would stand on the stoop with her keys in hand, her eyes darting toward her car like she was afraid of being seen lingering with me. David would wave from the driver's seat, the engine running. When they did come inside, they moved through my house like guests in a museum. They didn't sit long. They didn't ask about my days. They didn't notice the new crack in the living room window where the winter wind crept in, or the way my right knee clicked when I climbed the stairs. Tommy noticed, though. Children notice what adults pretend isn't there. That afternoon at the pharmacy, I paid for his candies and my blood pressure refill. Then we walked out into the pale winter sun. The air smelled like exhaust and cold metal. Tommy's little hand slipped into mine without thinking, like he still belonged to me in some simple way. "I saw Grandpa Joe last week," he said, talking about David's father. They had pizza. They watched a game. I asked Mom if we could come here too, and she said, "You're always tired." I almost laughed, but it came out as a breath. "Did she say that?" He nodded. "But you don't seem tired. You're quiet, like you're waiting." Waiting. The word found a tender place in me. I'd been waiting for company. Yes, waiting for the phone to ring with something other than a problem that needed my wallet. Waiting for someone to ask me how I was and mean it enough to sit down and hear the answer. At home, I made Tommy grilled cheese the way Harold liked it, with butter on the outside and the skillet hot enough to turn the bread golden, but not burned. Tommy ate at my kitchen table, swinging his feet and leaving crumbs like proof of life. While he chewed, he watched me the way I used to watch my own mother, when something unspoken filled the room. On the counter, my phone vibrated. Susan's name flashed, bright and cheerful, like a lie dressed up in a familiar font. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and answered. "Hi, honey." Her voice came quick, rehearsed. "Mom, I hate to ask, but—" I looked at Tommy, at the soft line of his brow as he tried to understand a world that was already teaching him to excuse people he loved. I looked past him at my hallway, where Harold's jacket still hung on a hook because I never found the heart to move it. And I felt something settle inside me. Not anger exactly. Not yet. More like the moment you realize the floor you've been standing on is not as solid as you believed. Susan kept talking. "It's just that David said if we don't pay the balance by Friday, the account could go to collections, and the bank—" I stared at the shoebox under my bed in my mind, the neat stacks of stubs and receipts, each one a small surrender. I remembered signing forms I barely understood at the credit union, when Susan said she needed a little help building her credit. And the way the loan officer's smile was polite but distant, as if he'd seen this story before. I remembered Susan asking me to keep my phone on because she'd need verification codes for an app, and how she'd brushed it off when I asked why. "Mom?" Susan said, sharpening her tone with impatience. "Are you there?" "I'm here," I said, and my voice surprised me with how steady it sounded. Tommy licked melted cheese from his thumb and asked, very quietly, "Is that why they don't come?" The question was small, but it opened something wide in my chest. I didn't answer him right away. I didn't answer Susan right away either. I simply listened to the buzz of my refrigerator, to the distant bark of a dog outside, to the way Susan's breathing changed when she realized I wasn't rushing to fix it. In that pause, I understood something that took me far too long to admit. They didn't visit because visiting required presence, and presence required seeing me. It was easier to call me when they needed something, easier to keep me useful, easier to keep me invisible. Susan's voice softened, but it wasn't tenderness, it was calculation. "Mom, please, it's not a lot, just until next payday." I looked at Tommy again, at the way he held his candy bag like it was treasure, innocent and light, and I knew I couldn't keep teaching him that love means always giving until you're empty. "Bring the paperwork," I heard myself say. "Bring whatever notices you got, the bank letters, the statements, everything, and come here when you do it." Susan went quiet, and in that quiet, I could almost see her mind turning, searching for the quickest exit. "Why?" "Because," I said, still calm, still warm, like a grandmother who has nothing but time. "If you want my help, I need to understand what I'm helping." When I hung up, my hand trembled, but my spine didn't. Tommy watched me like I'd just done something brave, though all I'd done was ask to see the truth in plain ink. I sat down across from him and smoothed the tablecloth, pressing out wrinkles that had been there for years. Outside, the afternoon light shifted, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting. I felt like I was waking up. Susan arrived 3 days later with a folder that looked too thin to carry so much trouble. I saw her car roll up from my living room window, the same silver sedan I had helped keep on the road more times than I could count. The engine idled as if she might change her mind. David stayed in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead like the street itself was an excuse. When Susan knocked, she didn't wait for me to answer. She opened the door the way she used to when she was a teenager, before manners became something she performed for other people. Cold air rushed in behind her, smelling faintly of gasoline and winter. "Mom, I brought it," she said, holding up the folder like proof of effort. Her cheeks were pink, either from the cold or from nerves. "But I don't know why we have to do this here. I told you, it's just a mix-up." "A mix-up leaves crumbs," I said gently, and stepped aside so she could come in. "This kind of thing leaves a trail." She paused at the sight of my kitchen table. Cleared off as if for a meeting. I had set out 2 mugs, a small plate of store-bought cookies, and my reading glasses. Beside my mug sat my shoebox, the lid slightly lifted like a warning. Susan's eyes flicked to it. Her mouth tightened for a second. Then she smiled, too quickly. "You kept all that?" "I kept what mattered," I said. She sat, but she didn't take off her coat. That told me more than her words ever could. People who plan to stay a while get comfortable. People who plan to leave keep one foot pointed toward the door. I opened the folder slowly. There were a few printed emails, a past due notice stamped in red, and 2 bank statements with David's name at the top. Susan tried to guide my eyes with her finger, tapping at the amount due like she wanted me to look at the number and stop thinking. "See? It's the credit line," she said. "They changed the interest rate. It got away from us." I kept my voice even. "Where's the original agreement?" She blinked. "What?" "The document you signed when you opened it," I said. "The terms, the signature page." Susan's face shifted, a small crack in her practiced expression. "We don't have that." I reached into my shoebox and pulled out a folded piece of paper I'd been holding onto for 2 years, half because I didn't understand it, and half because I didn't like the feeling it gave me. I smoothed it on the table. The paper was creased from being opened and closed too many times, like something that wanted to be forgotten. Susan's eyes widened as she recognized it. "Why do you have that?" "Because they mailed me a copy," I said, "and because my name is on it." The line was right there in black ink. Margaret Ellis, co-applicant. The date beside it was a Wednesday in March, the year after Harold died. I remembered that week clearly. Susan had taken me to lunch, paid for my salad with a bright smile, and told me she was setting up something smart so the family would be secure. She had slid her phone across the table and asked me to type in a code that had arrived as a text. She called it verification. I called it helping my daughter. Now I could see what it really was. Susan's hand hovered over the paper as if she might snatch it back. "Mom, that was... You said you'd help us." "I said I'd help you," I corrected, still calm. "I didn't say I'd sign myself into your debt without understanding what it meant." Her eyes darted toward the window, toward David's car. "It's not like that." I turned the statement toward her and pointed to a line I hadn't noticed before until I sat down the night after Tommy's question, heart pounding, and read everything like my life depended on it. Because in a quiet way, it did. A monthly payment had been drafted from an account that wasn't Susan's. It was mine. I watched Susan swallow. She pulled at the edge of her sleeve. "Okay, yes, it came from your account once. Just once. We were going to tell you." "It's been 8 months," I said softly. She lifted her chin, and for a moment I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who would lie about stealing cookies and then look offended when I checked the cookie jar. "You didn't even notice." The words hung there, heavy and ugly, not because they were true, but because she had said them like they made it acceptable. I took a slow breath through my nose. I noticed, I told her. I just kept thinking there must be a reason that didn't make you cruel. Susan's mouth opened, then closed. She looked tired suddenly, and I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But pity, I'd learned, can be used like a leash. I reached for the folder and slid out one more item. A letter from the bank addressed to me. The paper was thicker than normal, the kind they use for serious things. At the bottom was a phone number for fraud and disputes. I called them yesterday, I said. Susan sat up straight. You what? I asked for a complete account history, I continued. Every change, every authorization, every linked payment method, every email address on file. Her face drained of color. Mom, why would you do that? Because I needed to know what was true, I said, and my voice stayed gentle even as something inside me went firm. And because I'm not going to be scared of paperwork in my own life. Susan's breathing became shallow. You can't call the bank and accuse us of something. I didn't accuse anyone, I said. I asked questions, the kind I should have asked the day you put that phone in front of me. She stood so fast her chair scraped the tile. This is why we don't come over, she snapped, and then froze, realizing what she'd admitted. For a second, there was only the sound of my wall clock ticking. I felt my heart thump once, hard, like it had been waiting years to be heard. I looked up at her. You don't come over because it's easier to take from a voice on the phone than it is to take from a woman sitting in front of you. Her eyes glossed, anger and shame wrestling in the same small space. We're drowning, Mom. I know, I said quietly. But you don't get to use me as a life raft and then complain that I'm wet. Susan's shoulders sagged, and for a moment she looked older than her 42 years. David said you'd never do anything. He said you're too nice. I nodded slowly, letting the words settle the way dust settles after a door slams. Harold used to tell me kindness isn't weakness, I said. It's a choice, and I can choose differently. Susan's eyes sharpened again, panic creeping in. What are you going to do? I picked up my mug and took a sip even though the coffee had gone lukewarm. The steadiness of that small action felt important. It reminded me that I still had control over my hands, my voice, my life. I'm going to protect myself, I said. And I'm going to do it the right way. She shook her head, backing toward the door. Mom, please, don't make this a thing. I held her gaze, not angry, not cruel, just done being moved around like furniture. It's already a thing, I told her. You just liked it better when I pretended it wasn't. When she left, she didn't hug me. She didn't even look back. She ran to the car, slid into the passenger seat, and David pulled away so fast the tires spit gravel. I stood at my window and watched the empty street after they disappeared. My house felt quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. Before, it had been lonely. Now it felt like space clearing, like a room after you've opened the windows and let the stale air out. I walked back to the kitchen table and gathered the papers into neat stacks. Then I picked up the bank letter and traced the printed phone number with my fingertip, steady as a metronome. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, and somewhere down the block a dog barked once, sharp and certain. I sat down, pulled my notepad toward me, and wrote the date at the top of the page. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for the next request. I was preparing for the next truth. That night, sleep wouldn't come, no matter how carefully I folded myself into it. I lay in Harold's old flannel sheets listening to the house breathe, every small sound suddenly loud. The heater clicked on and off. A car passed somewhere far away. My phone rested on the nightstand, dark and innocent looking, as if it hadn't been the doorway to so many quiet extractions. Sometime after midnight, I got up and went to the kitchen. I turned on the small lamp over the sink, the one Harold installed because I hated harsh overhead light. Its glow pooled softly over the table, over the papers I'd stacked so neatly earlier, as if order alone could fix what had been bent out of shape. I made tea and sat down, chamomile, the kind meant to calm you. My hands shook anyway. I spread everything out slowly, not rushing myself. Bank statements first, then the loan agreement, then my own account records, printed from the bank's website that afternoon with the help of a patient teller who called me ma'am and didn't rush when I asked her to repeat things. I lined them up by date the way Harold used to line up tools before starting a project. When you see everything together, patterns stop hiding. There it was. Not just the one payment Susan admitted to, but many. Small enough not to set off alarms in my mind at first. 200 here, 150 there, always on days when I'd been distracted, after a doctor's appointment, before a holiday, during the week Tommy was sick, and Susan called crying. The withdrawals followed emotion the way a shadow follows light. My chest tightened, not with anger yet, but with something heavier. I realized I'd been budgeting around theft without knowing it, skipping little pleasures, wearing shoes a season too long, turning the thermostat down and putting on a sweater instead. I'd blamed age, inflation, bad luck, but it wasn't bad luck. It was trust, misplaced and quietly harvested. I picked up my phone and opened my messages. Susan's name filled the screen with years of small talk and soft urgency. I scrolled back further than I ever had, noticing things I'd missed before. Her sudden concern about my online banking login. Her insistence that I keep my phone nearby. The way she'd say, "Just don't worry about it, Mom, I've got it," whenever I asked too many questions. I set the phone down carefully, like it might break if I was rough with it. Have you ever realized too late that you were being used? The question came to me without warning, not sharp, just sad. I'd spent years teaching Susan to speak up for herself, to advocate, to survive. Somewhere along the way, she'd learned how to do it at my expense, and I'd helped by being quiet. By 3 a.m, something in me shifted, not into rage, into resolve. I called the bank again the next day, early, before fear could talk me out of it. This time I asked about protections, about account permissions, about what it meant to be a co-applicant versus an authorized user. The man on the phone spoke clearly, professionally, and when he explained how my account had been linked, his tone changed just slightly. Concern replacing routine. "You didn't authorize these transfers yourself?" he asked. "No," I said. "I trusted someone else to handle things for me." There was a pause. "Then we need to document that." He explained the process without rushing me. Forms, timelines, temporary safeguards. He told me to change passwords immediately, to remove linked devices, to enable alerts. He suggested I speak to their fraud department, and if I felt overwhelmed, to bring someone with me in person. "I can come alone," I said, surprising myself. After I hung up, I sat very still. My hands were steady now. That felt important. I spent the afternoon doing things I'd avoided for years, updating passwords, reviewing my credit report. Something I'd always found intimidating, like looking into a mirror that might tell me bad news. I saw the marks Susan and David had left behind in neat, official language. Accounts opened, balances carried. My name threaded through things I'd never fully agreed to. Each discovery hurt, but it also clarified. I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't confused. I wasn't old and mistaken. I was right. That evening, Tommy called on Susan's phone. I could hear the television in the background, some loud cartoon I didn't recognize. His voice was softer than usual. "Grandma, Mom's mad," he said. I closed my eyes. "I know, sweetheart." "Did I do something bad?" "No," I said quickly. "You asked a good question." He was quiet for a moment. "Dad says grown-up stuff is complicated." I smiled sadly. "It is," I said. "But complicated doesn't mean wrong." After we hung up, I sat on the couch and looked around the living room. Harold's chair, the framed photos, a lifetime arranged to look smaller than it was. I thought about how many times I'd swallowed discomfort because it felt easier than confrontation. Did you ever feel like staying silent was the same as being kind? The answer, I knew now, was no. Kindness without boundaries doesn't stay kind. It turns into something else, something that drains. Before bed, I wrote a list. Not a plan, not steps, just truths. Things I needed to protect. My income, my credit, my peace. I didn't dress it up in soft language. I didn't apologize to the page. I wasn't doing this to punish Susan. I was doing it to stop disappearing. When I turned off the lights, the house felt different again. Not tense. Awake. Like it was waiting with me, not for someone else to arrive, but for me to finally stand where I belonged. The first letter arrived on a Thursday, thick and official, with my name printed in a way that made it look more important than I felt. I let it sit on the entry table for an hour before opening it, just to prove to myself that I could. The return address belonged to the bank's fraud and risk department. That word, risk, used to make me nervous. Now it felt accurate. Inside, everything was calm and procedural. Case number, contact person, a summary written in careful language that avoided blame while clearly outlining facts. Unauthorized transfers, linked accounts, temporary restrictions placed for my protection. They thanked me for my patience. I laughed softly at that. Patience, it seemed, was something I had in abundance. I called the number at the bottom and spoke to a woman named Linda. Her voice was steady and warm, the kind of voice that makes you feel like you're not a bother. She explained the next steps, asked me to confirm dates, amounts, whether I recognized certain email addresses attached to my account. I didn't. She noted that without judgment. "You did the right thing by calling when you did," she said. I held the receiver a little tighter. "I should have called sooner." "Most people do," she replied gently. That afternoon, I went down to the branch in person. I dressed carefully, not out of vanity, but out of respect for myself. A pressed blouse, my good coat, the scarf Harold bought me on a trip years ago because he said it matched my eyes. The bank smelled like carpet cleaner and paper. I took a number and waited, watching younger people tap impatiently at their phones. When my turn came, I sat across from a man with kind eyes and a nameplate that read Daniel. I laid my documents on the desk one by one, not in a rush, not apologizing. Daniel reviewed everything with quiet concentration. He turned his screen slightly so I could see what he was seeing. Dates, authorizations. The trail I had followed late at night with tea and worry. "This account linking required a confirmation code," he said. "Do you remember providing one?" "Yes," I said. "I thought it was for something else." He nodded, like he'd heard that before. It happens. There was comfort in that. Not because it excused what Susan had done, but because it reminded me I wasn't uniquely foolish, just human. By the time I left, new safeguards were in place. My accounts stood alone again, no invisible hands reaching in. I walked out into the cold air feeling lighter, even though nothing had been resolved yet. That feeling didn't last. Susan called that evening, her voice sharp before I even said hello. "Why is the bank calling us?" I leaned against the counter, staring at the small crack in the wall near the doorway, the one I'd been meaning to fix for years. Because they noticed money moving where it shouldn't. "You told them it was us," she said. "I told them the truth," I replied. Her breath came fast through the line. "Do you have any idea what this could do to us?" I closed my eyes. "Do you have any idea what it's already done to me?" There was a pause, and then her tone changed, slipping into something softer, almost pleading. "Mom, they're saying they might close the account. David's furious. He says you're overreacting." I felt a small, sad smile touch my mouth. "Of course he does. Why are you doing this now?" she demanded. "Why couldn't you just talk to me?" "I did talk to you," I said. "For years. You just didn't hear me because I wasn't saying no," she scoffed. "So you're choosing paperwork over family?" I straightened, feeling something solid click into place inside me. "I'm choosing myself," I said. "Family shouldn't require me to give up my safety." She hung up without saying goodbye. The silence afterward felt heavy, but it didn't crush me. I made dinner, I washed the dishes, I folded laundry while the evening news murmured in the background. Ordinary things, grounding things, each one a reminder that my life was bigger than this conflict. 2 days later, a letter from a law office arrived. Not a threat, exactly, but a notice. It explained in polite legal language that Susan and David were disputing the bank's actions and requested that I reconsider my claims. I read it twice, then set it down carefully. My hands didn't shake. I called the number on the letter and spoke to a paralegal who sounded tired. I told her I would not be retracting anything. I told her all communication should be in writing. I asked for copies of any documents they planned to reference. She agreed, brisk and efficient. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the wall for a long time. I thought about Susan as a little girl, about the way she used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I thought about the mother I'd been, the mistakes I knew I'd made, the love I'd never doubted. Did you ever wonder when love stopped being enough? The question lingered, unanswered. Maybe love was still there. Maybe it was just buried under fear and entitlement. Either way, I couldn't dig it out alone. That weekend, Tommy didn't come over. No call, no quick visit. I told myself it wasn't his fault. I told myself he'd be back. On Sunday morning, I sat in my favorite chair by the window and watched the street wake up. People walking dogs, a couple arguing quietly, life continuing without asking permission. I realized something then, simple and steady. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to be whole. And whatever came next, I would face it standing up, with my name clear on my accounts and my voice finally taking up the space it deserved. On Monday morning, I found a thin envelope wedged in my mailbox behind the grocery flyers. It had Susan's handwriting on the front, rounded letters, familiar as a lullaby, and a strip of certified mail green along the edge. That little strip made my stomach tighten. People don't send certified letters to mothers they visit for Sunday dinner. I carried it inside like it might leak something. The house was quiet, except for the ticking clock and the faint hiss of my kettle. I set the envelope on the table and stared at it until the tea steeped too long and turned bitter. When I finally opened it, the paper inside was crisp and formal. Susan and David were requesting reimbursement for money they claimed they'd spent on my behalf over the last 2 years. Utility bills, grocery runs, home maintenance. There was a total at the bottom so large it felt like a dare. They'd attached a few blurry screenshots of receipts, some with dates that didn't match my own records, some printed on thermal paper that looked freshly copied. One even listed items I never buy, like energy drinks and a men's shaving kit. I sat very still, reading it again and again, not because I didn't understand the words, but because I did. This wasn't confusion. This was pressure dressed up as paperwork. They wanted me to feel guilty. They wanted me to get scared. They wanted me to hand over the one thing they couldn't take without permission: my signature. I went to the bedroom and pulled the shoebox from under my bed. I brought it back to the table, lifted the lid, and laid my own records beside their letter. My receipts were neat, dated, and real. Utility statements with my address printed clearly. Bank withdrawal slips with my name, my account, my handwriting. The difference between truth and performance was right there on the table, plain as daylight. My phone buzzed. David's name flashed on the screen, and that alone felt like a trespass. He rarely called me directly. He liked to work through Susan, like I was an appliance that came with one remote. I answered anyway. "Hello, David." His voice was tight, irritated before it was polite. "Margaret, we need to settle this." The way he said my name, sharp, clipped, made me picture him in his car, jaw clenched, already convinced he was right. "I received your letter," I said. "Good," he replied. "Then you understand what we're asking. What you're asking is for me to pay you for things you either didn't do or did because you wanted access," I said, keeping my voice low. My hands were calm on the tabletop. That surprised me, and it strengthened me at the same time. He exhaled hard. "Don't do that. Don't twist it. We supported you." I looked at the kitchen window, at the faint reflection of my face over the backyard, lines around my mouth, silver in my hair. A woman who had buried a husband and still remembered how to make a home feel warm. "If you supported me," I said, "you would have visited without needing money to change hands." There was a beat of silence, then his tone changed, smoother, more dangerous. "You know how this looks, right? Calling the bank, talking about fraud. People could think you're not managing things well." My throat went dry. I understood the shape of that threat immediately. Not loud, not explicit, but sharp enough to cut. He wanted me to fear being seen as old and unreliable, the way people sometimes do when a woman's hair turns gray. He wanted me to back down before someone in an office decided I was a problem. I let my breath out slowly. "I'm managing just fine," I said. "And I keep records." He made a small sound, almost a laugh. "Records don't matter if you don't have the right help." After I hung up, my hands finally trembled, but only for a moment. Then I stood, walked to my desk in the corner of the living room, and opened my laptop. Harold used to joke that I treated documents like family photos. He was right. Paper doesn't change its story to suit the room. I searched for an attorney who handled elder financial exploitation and consumer law. The words felt strange in my mouth, like a diagnosis you don't want but need to name. I found a local office with reviews that mentioned patience and plain language, and I made an appointment for Wednesday morning. On Tuesday, I did something else I'd been avoiding. I logged into my phone account online and pulled up my call history. It took me a while to find the right page. I wrote down dates when Susan had called me crying, when David had texted me urgent, when verification codes had come through in a flurry. I printed the pages and slid them into a folder. Not because I loved conflict, but because I was done being the only one who remembered. That evening, I installed a small doorbell camera. My neighbor's grandson helped, climbing a step stool and tightening screws while humming to himself. He didn't ask questions. He just showed me how to use the app and where the recordings were saved. When he left, I stood at my front door and pressed the button once, just to see the little light blink and know that my porch had eyes now. Wednesday came with a pale sky and a cold wind that tugged at my coat. The attorney's office smelled like coffee and copier toner. A receptionist offered me water in a paper cup. I watched my hands around it, steady again. Always steadier when I chose truth. The attorney, a woman named Miss Ramirez, greeted me with a firm handshake. She looked to be in her 40s, hair pulled back neatly, eyes kind but sharp. She didn't talk down to me. That alone made my chest loosen. I laid out my documents, the loan agreement, The bank's case letter, Susan's certified demand, my receipts, my phone logs. Miss Ramirez flipped through them quietly, her expression changing in small, controlled ways. Concern, recognition, a faint tightening around her mouth when she saw David's insinuation in the letter's wording. "This is a common tactic," she said finally, tapping the certified letter with one finger. "They're trying to create a narrative that you owe them. If you pay, even a little, it can be used as an admission." "I'm not paying," I said. The certainty in my own voice startled me. It sounded like someone I'd been waiting to become. Ms. Ramirez nodded. "Good. We're going to respond in writing, calmly, with documentation, and we're going to protect you going forward." She explained my options in plain language. She talked about credit freezes, account monitoring, and limiting who could access my information. She talked about the importance of keeping communication in writing. Her words didn't feel like weapons. They felt like locks being installed on doors I didn't know were open. When I walked back out to my car, the wind hit my face hard enough to make my eyes water. I wiped them with my glove and laughed softly at myself. Anyone watching might have thought I was crying from sadness. But it wasn't only sadness. It was the relief of finally having a name for what had been happening, and a way to stop it without becoming someone cruel. At home, I found a voicemail from Susan. Her voice sounded sweet, almost sugary like she'd practiced. "Mom, we should talk. Like, really talk. No lawyers, just family." I listened twice, then saved it. Family, I thought, shouldn't be frightened by transparency. I set the phone down, opened my folder, and slid Ms. Ramirez's business card into the front pocket like a promise. Then I went to the stove and started dinner, the ordinary sound of a pan heating up filling the kitchen. For years, my home had been a place where other people took what they needed and left. Now, it was becoming something else, a place where I kept what was mine. The letter from Ms. Ramirez went out on a Friday, certified and careful, every sentence weighed like it mattered. Because it did. I watched the mail carrier tuck it into the outgoing slot and felt a strange mix of fear and pride, like sending a child off on their first solo trip. Once it was gone, there was no pretending this would smooth over on its own. The response from Susan and David came faster than I expected. David showed up at my door on Sunday afternoon alone. The doorbell camera chimed softly on my phone, and there he was on the screen, shifting his weight, jaw tight. I didn't open the door right away. I sat in my chair and let the moment stretch, not out of cruelty, but because I was done jumping at other people's urgency. When I did open it, I stayed inside the threshold. The cold air slipped in between us. "We need to talk," he said, already stepping forward as if my porch were his by default. "We can talk here," I replied, one hand resting lightly on the doorframe. His eyes flicked past me, into the house. "This is ridiculous. Lawyers, letters, you're blowing this out of proportion." I smiled, not warmly, not coldly, just calmly. "If it were out of proportion, it wouldn't stand up to paper," he scoffed. "Susan's been crying all week. You've turned this into some kind of accusation." "I turned it into the truth," I said. "The accusation was already there. It just wasn't written down." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You don't want this kind of attention, Margaret. People start asking questions." I met his gaze and didn't look away. "So do I said. That stopped him, not because he suddenly cared, but because he hadn't expected it. He stood there for a long moment, searching my face for the old softness, the easy guilt. He didn't find it. "Fine," he said finally. "Have it your way." "I am," I replied, and closed the door gently but firmly. My phone rang an hour later. Susan this time. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call, and another. When I finally listened, her voice cracked with anger and something like fear. "You're tearing the family apart," she said. "Do you know that?" I sat at my kitchen table and pressed my palm flat against the wood, grounding myself. "No," I said aloud to the empty room. "I'm refusing to be torn down." The next week passed in a blur of small, important actions. Credit freezes confirmed, new account numbers issued, alerts set to notify me of any movement, any attempt. I felt like I was reclaiming rooms in a house I'd been pushed out of slowly, politely, over time. Then came the meeting Miss Ramirez had warned me about. The bank requested an in-person review with all parties present. A neutral room, a neutral mediator, an authority figure who spoke in procedures and policies, not feelings, the kind of place where stories either held up or collapsed. I arrived early. I always do. The room was plain, with a long table and a small camera mounted in the corner, blinking quietly. A security officer stood by the door, not threatening, just present. Susan and David arrived together, their energy sharp, contained. Susan wouldn't meet my eyes. The bank representative, a woman with short hair and a calm voice, explained the purpose of the meeting. She laid out the timeline, the authorizations, the discrepancies. She used my name often, respectfully. That mattered more than I expected. Susan interrupted once, voice shaking. She agreed to help us. The representative nodded. "Help requires informed consent," she said evenly, "and documentation." David tried to argue. He talked faster, louder, but facts don't respond to volume. When the phone records came up, when the verification codes were mentioned, when the withdrawals were shown alongside dates, Susan had been out of state, the room changed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I answered questions simply. When asked why I hadn't noticed sooner, I said, "Because I trusted my family." No one laughed at that. Susan's face crumpled when the mediator explained the outcome. The account would be separated permanently, the disputed amounts provisionally credited back to me pending further review. Any further contact regarding finances would need to go through legal counsel. Susan whispered my name, like she wanted me to rescue her from consequences. I looked at her, really looked. The daughter I loved, the woman who had learned how to take without asking. "I hope you get help," I said quietly. "But I can't be it anymore." Have you ever had to choose between being loved and being safe? When the meeting ended, the authority figures stood. Papers were signed, hands were shaken. The security officer opened the door. It was all very ordinary. That was the strangest part. Life-changing moments rarely announce themselves. Outside, the air was sharp and bright. I took a deep breath and felt something unclench in my chest that I hadn't realized was locked tight. Tommy didn't come with them that day. I was grateful for that. Some lessons are not for children to witness. At home, I made myself soup and ate it slowly. I noticed the taste. I noticed the quiet. I noticed how my shoulders sat lower, easier. The phone stayed silent that night. For the first time in a long while, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace beginning to learn my name. The next morning, my bank app sent a notification while I was buttering toast. It was a simple message. A provisional credit had posted to my account. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to, not because I didn't understand it, but because it felt like proof that reality could be corrected. Money, after all, is only paper and numbers until you remember what it costs to earn it and how hard it is to replace trust. I set the phone down and listened to the house. The refrigerator hummed, the toast popped, the world kept moving. But inside me, something had shifted from defense to direction. I wasn't just plugging holes anymore. I was deciding what came next. I drove to the credit union later that day to open a new savings account, the kind with no linked users, no shared access, no family convenience. The teller, a young woman with a bright scarf, asked if I wanted to add anyone as a beneficiary. I thought of Susan. I thought of Tommy. I'll decide later, I said. She nodded as if that made perfect sense. And it did. For the first time, my future didn't feel like a thing I owed away by default. On the way home, I stopped by the grocery store. It wasn't a special errand, but I made it one. I bought fresh oranges, real butter, and a small bouquet of daisies from the checkout display. I didn't rush. I didn't calculate whether I could justify the expense. I simply chose what made my kitchen feel alive. When I got home, I put the flowers in Harold's old glass pitcher and set them on the table. The bright yellow centers looked almost stubborn against the winter light, like a small refusal to dim. The first social call I received wasn't from family. It was from Nancy, my neighbor 2 houses down. We'd waved for years, exchanged pies at Christmas, but I'd never invited her in the way you invite someone into your real life. She called because she'd noticed the new doorbell camera. "Everything okay over there, Margaret?" she asked. I hesitated. Old habits whispered that my problems were private, that speaking them aloud would make me look weak. But another part of me, newer, steadier, remembered what Ms. Ramirez said about isolation. How people who take advantage often count on you being too proud to tell anyone. "I've had some family trouble," I said carefully. Nancy didn't gasp or pry. She simply said, "Do you want company?" That question, so simple, made my eyes burn. I swallowed and tried to keep my voice even. "Yes," I admitted. "I think I do." She came over that afternoon with a tin of lemon cookies and the kind of presence that doesn't demand anything. We sat at my kitchen table, and I told her a softened version of the truth. Not every detail, not every wound, just enough. She listened with her hands wrapped around her mug, nodding slowly. When I mentioned the certified letter, she sighed like she'd been holding her own story for years. "My sister did something similar when my dad got sick," she said quietly. "Different details, same kind of hunger." It helped, hearing that. Not because I wanted companionship in pain, but because it reminded me I wasn't a strange, solitary failure. This happened to people, and people survived it. Nancy told me about a community center not far away where seniors met for crafts, book talks, and little day trips. I'd always rolled my eyes at that sort of thing, imagining forced cheer and bingo cards. But she said it wasn't like that. She said there was a walking group that met on Tuesdays and a writing circle on Thursdays. "Just come once," she said. "If you hate it, you never have to go again." That night, after Nancy left, I sat in Harold's chair and stared at the television without really seeing it. I kept thinking about the phrase, "just come once." That's what I'd been waiting for from Susan for years. Just come once without needing anything. Just come once to sit and let me exist. But if she wouldn't, I could still choose to be seen by someone else. On Tuesday, I went to the community center. The building smelled like old books and coffee. A bulletin board near the entrance was covered in flyers with cheerful fonts. Yoga, potluck, tax help, grief support. I paused at that last one. The word grief felt like a doorway I'd kept locked, even from myself. A volunteer with silver hair and bright lipstick greeted me. "First time?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted. She handed me a name tag and a schedule. "We're glad you're here," she said, like she meant it. In the walking group, I met a woman named Eleanor who laughed like she didn't apologize for taking up space. I met a retired mail carrier named Frank who told stories that made everyone smile. I walked slowly, my knee complaining, my lungs rusty from too much sitting, but no one hurried me. No one acted irritated by my pace. That alone felt like kindness I didn't have to earn. When I got home, There was an envelope taped to my door. My stomach dropped until I saw the handwriting. Tommy's. The letters were uneven, the spelling uncertain, but the heart drawn at the bottom was sure. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper. It said, "Grandma, I miss you. Mom says you're busy. Can I come soon? I like your grilled cheese." There was another heart, bigger this time. I sat on the floor right there in the entryway, coat still on, and pressed the paper to my chest. The pain of being kept from him hit hard and sudden like cold water. But beneath it was something else, a reminder that love still existed in my family, just not from the people who thought love meant access. I called Susan once. She didn't answer. I didn't leave a pleading message. I left a calm one. "Tommy can come visit anytime," I said into the voicemail. "I'm available. You can drop him off, or I can meet you in a public place, whatever feels comfortable. But I won't discuss money, only Tommy." Then I hung up, and I didn't call again. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table under the soft lamp and wrote Tommy a letter back. I told him I missed him too. I told him my house was still his house. I told him I'd make grilled cheese whenever he came. I didn't say anything bad about his mother. Children should not be asked to carry adult bitterness. When I sealed the envelope, I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. My life was quieter, yes, but it was also wider. And for the first time in a long time, that quiet didn't feel like being left behind. It felt like room to breathe. Spring arrived slowly that year, like it was unsure whether it was welcome. The mornings stayed cold, but the light lingered longer in the afternoons, touching the corners of my living room where dust used to settle unnoticed. I opened windows again. I let fresh air argue with the smell of old habits. Tommy came to see me for the first time in nearly 2 months on a Saturday. Susan dropped him off without coming inside. She stayed in the car, engine running, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. I waved anyway. Not for her, for myself. Tommy ran up the walkway like he was afraid I might disappear. He wrapped his arms around my waist and pressed his face into my coat. I held him tightly, breathing in the clean, familiar scent of soap and crayons. "You still make grilled cheese?" he asked, hopeful. "Always," I said. Inside, nothing had changed and everything had. We sat at the table, the same one where paperwork once felt like a threat. Now it was just a table again. He talked about school, about a science project involving plants. I listened, really listened, the way presence should feel. At one point, he looked around and said, "It's quiet here." "Yes," I replied gently. "Do you like that?" He thought for a moment. "It feels safe." The word settled into me slowly, warmly, safe. That was what I'd been trying to build without knowing the name for it. Susan texted once during the visit, just a short message asking when she should come back. No apology, no accusation either, just distance measured and cautious. I answered with a time and nothing more. Boundaries don't need speeches. They need consistency. After Tommy left, the house felt fuller instead of empty. That surprised me. I washed the dishes without rushing. I noticed the hum of the afternoon, the neighbor's radio drifting through an open window, the soft ache in my knee reminding me I was still here, still in my body. Later that week, I attended the writing circle Nancy had mentioned. We sat in a loose circle with notebooks on our laps, sharing small pieces of our lives. When it was my turn, I didn't tell the whole story. I told a moment, a feeling, about learning the difference between giving and disappearing. No one interrupted. No one rushed me to a lesson. On my walk home, I realized something simple and steady. I wasn't defined by what I had endured. I was defined by what I had chosen to stop. That night, I placed Tommy's letter in a small wooden box on my dresser, along with Harold's watch and a few photos I loved. Not relics of loss, anchors. The world hadn't become perfect, but it had become honest, and that, I was learning, was enough to build a life on. The first real change came quietly, the way most lasting things do. One morning, as I stood in line at the bank updating a final form, I realized no one behind the counter knew me as someone's mother or someone's inconvenience. I was just Margaret, a woman with her own account, her own signature, her own steady voice. The clerk slid the receipt toward me, and when I folded it into my wallet, my hands didn't hesitate. The months that followed settled into a new rhythm. Tommy came every other Saturday. Sometimes Susan stayed in the car. Sometimes she waved. Once or twice, she walked him to the door but didn't cross the threshold. I didn't invite her in, and I didn't shut her out. I let the space speak for itself. Tommy learned where the glasses were kept, which floorboard creaked, how to butter toast without tearing the bread. Small inheritances, the good kind. We played cards. We watered the garden I'd started in the backyard, my hands in the soil again, feeling useful in a way that didn't cost me dignity. Susan and I spoke less. When we did, it was careful, factual. No money, no favors. Just weather, schedules, Tommy. It hurt, but not the way it used to. This pain was clean. It didn't rot inside me. One afternoon, while sorting old files to shred, I found a note Harold had written years ago and tucked into a folder by accident. His handwriting slanted slightly, confident but kind. It said, "Don't let being needed replace being loved." I sat there for a long time holding that scrap of paper, understanding it fully for the first time. Have you ever reached a moment when the lesson arrives too late for regret, but just in time for peace? By the time summer edged in, my life no longer felt like a reaction. It felt intentional. I had friends now who knew my story without owning it. I had a routine that belonged to me. I volunteered once a week at the community center, helping others sort forms and letters, reminding them gently to read what they sign. Not with fear, with respect for themselves. Susan never apologized outright. I stopped waiting for it. She stopped asking for money. That mattered more. One evening, after Tommy had gone home, I sat on the porch as the sun slipped down behind the houses. The doorbell camera blinked quietly. My phone lay face down on the table. No longer something I flinched at. I thought about the woman I'd been when this began, how small I'd allowed myself to become in the name of love. Did you ever realize that peace isn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of boundaries? I stood up slowly, joints stiff but spirit light, and went back inside. The house welcomed me the way it always had, only now I filled it properly. If you've listened this far, thank you for sitting with my story. Stories like mine are quieter than scandals, but they're lived by more people than we admit. If you've found something here that resonated, a like or a subscription helps these stories reach others who might need them. And I'd truly like to know, if you were in my place, what would you have done?